past couple of nights, I've been talking about the terror, the evil that Trump has been visiting upon immigrants. I don't give a goddamn if they're documented or not. These are political refugees. These are people who are fleeing violence in their countries. And they're bringing their children to get away from it. And most, if not all, of the violence that they're fleeing comes as a result of U.S. policy to these countries in Central America over the past century. Well, Nick Kristof in the Times today hit it right where it needs to be hit, in the bullseye. He says that Trump's immigration policy veers from abhorrent to evil. Thank you, Nick. This is what he writes. We as a nation have crossed so many ugly lines recently, yet one new policy of Trump's particularly haunts me. I'm speaking of the administration's tactic of seizing children from desperate refugees at the border. And then he quotes some of the people who have gone through this terror courtesy of this piece of human waste in the Oval Office. A Salvadoran woman wrote in a declaration in an A.C.L.U. lawsuit against the government after her 4-year-old son and her 10-year-old son were taken from her. This is what she wrote, quote, I was given only 5 minutes to say goodbye. My babies started crying when they found out we were going to be separated. In tears myself, I asked my boys to be brave, and I promised we would be together soon. I begged the woman who took my children to keep them together so they could at least have each other. End quote. Every time I hear of or read about one of these stories about what this monster, Trump, is perpetrating against innocent people who cannot defend themselves, who have no recourse whatsoever, they truly define the word victim at the hands of this evil son of a bitch who thinks he's president of the United States. Every time I read one of these stories, I just... I can't help but remember what I've read about the children of Jews during Hitler's era in Europe, Middle Europe, not just Germany. The taking of children, the separating children in the long lines into the slaughterhouse. Children this way, parents this way. I mean, that goes beyond evil. It goes into some realm that is unspeakable. And I've said before, it is the realm that caused Elie Wiesel, an observant Jew, to realize there was no God. The mother I just quoted, Kristof says, for her protection, she's only identified by her initials, J.I.L., call her Jill. She noted that while she was in El Salvador, she was severely beaten in front of her family by a gang, and she fled the country to save the lives of her children. Kristof asked this question, and I would ask it too. Who among us would not do the same? Now, Trump, I'm convinced, doesn't give a shit about children, his or anybody else's. He's incapable of feeling that parental connection. I've watched him. Now, where concerns his daughter Ivanka is a little bit different. I wouldn't call that a parental connection, more like an incestuous connection. But Trump has made it clear, hasn't he? Who the hell talks about their daughter the way Trump talked with Howard Stern about Ivanka? It's just fucking disgusting. I mean, it really is. But then consider the source. But to be a parent, the primary responsibility of a parent, it's not to love them. It's not to feed them or house them. The primary responsibility of a parent is to protect their children. That's number one. Everything else flows from that. To protect them. If you have a vicious son of a bitch 2,000 miles away from the border whose orders say, take the children, what are you going to do? What are you going to feel? How are you going to react? I mean, this is some unconscionable shit. Once again, I cannot understand why we, the American people, continue to allow this fucking monster to be president. I won't be around, but I think history is going to, I hope, unless a Fahrenheit 451 kind of dynamic starts to develop, or a Handmaid's Tale dynamic, both of which are possible at this point. But if that doesn't come to pass, I know that historians are going to look at Trump, and historians have a problem doing this, but I think they're going to use the word evil. Evil. Now, the Christians are celebrating him. He's their hero. The white evangelical Christians. Oh, they fucking love him. Back to Nick. Jill noted that she had heard that her children might have been separated and sent to 2 different foster homes. She said, quote, I'm scared for my little boys. That's what she said. So Christoph asked a question that I think, I know I've been asking it, and I think everybody should ask themselves this. Is this really who we are in this country now? Now, Christoph happens to be the son of a refugee himself. He lives in Oregon, I think, or he grew up in Oregon, Washington State. And he said, I find that in this case, Trump's policy has veered from merely abhorrent to truly evil. Family separations arise in part because of the new Trump administration policy announced last month of so-called zero tolerance for people who cross the border illegally. That means that parents are jailed, which rarely happened before, and the kids are taken away from them. Zero tolerance for people who want to come to this country because they are fleeing chaos and destruction. Like the Jews who tried to get into this country, when? 1939, 1938? What was that ship, Kathy? Was it the SS Havana? No, what was it? Will you look it up for me? Because a Jewish refugee ship that was turned away. Because it's important to me to know the name. But that's what this reminds me of. Now, it's a matter of scale. I understand that. I understand that. These kids are not being separated and sent into execution chambers. I understand that. St. Louis, thank you. Was that a U.S. flagship? Was it USS St. Louis? Yeah, it departed France, but did they just call it the? Did they just call it the St. Louis, or did they call it the USS St. Louis? It was a German ocean liner. MS. Okay. And if you remember that evil bit of history, you know what happened to the people on that ship. 2, 3, 4, 5 times they tried to disembark in Cuba, United States, and Roosevelt said no. Anyway, parents jailed, kids taken away from them. Kirsten Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the nice Swedish lady, either Swedish or Norwegian, maybe Icelandic, I'm not exactly sure, but Kirsten Nielsen said, quote, "That's no different than what we do every day in every part of the United States when an adult of a family commits a crime. If you are a parent and you break into a house, you will be incarcerated by police and thereby separated from your family." End quote. And yet, the woman that we're talking about, Miriam, the Honduran woman who arrived in the U.S., she didn't break any law, Kirsten. She didn't break a law. She simply followed the established procedure by presenting herself at an official border crossing and requesting asylum because she was in danger for her life and her children's in Honduras.